Once upon a time there was a ship called Mrs. Orangeleaf. She was painted grey, and on her side there was a number. So when she passed other ships in the sea, they would know who she was and say, "Good day, Mrs. Orangeleaf." And here's one of her many adventures.
Once upon a time, there was a ship called Mrs. Orangeleaf. She was painted grey and on her side was a number, so when she passed other ships in the sea, they would know who she was and say, "Good day, Mrs. Orangeleaf." Mrs. Orangeleaf used to carry fuel and water to give to other ships belonging to the Queen of the United Kingdom, known as Royal Navy ships. They too were painted grey. One day Mrs. Orangeleaf was sent to a hot part of the world called the Gulf of Arabia. There were lots of ships in this area, so she was kept very busy giving fuel and water to them. Sometimes Mrs. Orangeleaf had to stop for a rest because she had worked so hard. Mrs. Orangeleaf loved the sea splashing on her face. It was so cool and refreshing for her, and it was fun bobbing up and down, hitting the waves. The man in charge of Mrs. Orangeleaf was Captain Stephen. There was Mr. Nav, who would tell Mrs. Orangeleaf where she was going to go each day, and the crew, who were a hearty bunch of sailors and loved the warm weather. One day in the Gulf, Captain Stephen got a message from another ship that there were pirates in the area. One of the pirates was known to him, Captain Whitebeard. He'd seen him before when he had served on another ship called Old Grandma Alna. She was bigger than Mrs. Orangeleaf and had seen much of the world. Captain Stephen had had dealings with this pirate before. He knew he was a bad pirate, so he told Mr. Nav to be on his guard and post lookouts.
"If need be, I shall use the guns."
What's the pirate like, sir?
He is the great-great-great-grandson of Blackbeard, the notorious pirate of the high seas. His name is Captain Whitebeard, and he has a band of other pirates with him.
Lookouts were posted on the bridge. One of these was a person known as A.B. Ali. He had been at sea for years and had sailed much of the world. Down below, the ship's cook, George, was preparing a meal for the sailors. He loved to tell the younger crew members his tales at sea. The captain called the chief engineer.
"Give me full speed, so we can get ahead of the pirates and be ready for them."
Aye, aye, sir.
"Mr. Nav, set a course northwest."
Aye, aye, sir. Come on, Mrs. Orangeleaf. Let's show them pirates we are better than them.
In the meantime, Captain Whitebeard was doing all he could to catch up with Mrs. Orangeleaf. Captain Whitebeard was a small man on the large side and wore a patch over his left eye. He was pacing up and down on the bridge complaining about Captain Stephen and Mrs. Orangeleaf. Only days before, Mrs. Orangeleaf had said goodbye to her friends, Benjamin Illustrious, a big aircraft carrier, and Daisy Gloucester, a destroyer. They both belonged to the Royal Navy and the Queen of the United Kingdom.
"If we need them, I'm sure our friends from the Illustrious and Daisy Gloucester would come back and help us. Don't you agree, Mr. Nav?"
Yes, sir, I do.
"Get in touch with them, Mr. Nav."
Aye, aye, sir.
Suddenly, from the bridge came a shout. It was A.B. Ali.
"Ship on the horizon, sir."
"Can you make it out?"
It's too far away, sir.
"OK, keep looking and let me know the outcome. I know what he is like. He is full of tricks to make you believe his ship is not a pirate ship. One of the things that he does is to set a distress flare off to make you think he is in trouble, and then he hoists the flag to say that he needs help. Look out for that, A.B. Ali."
Aye, aye, sir.
The captain's right-hand man had arrived on the bridge and said to the chief officer that he was to put men around the bridge as sentries, in case Whitebeard should try and board them.
Aye, aye, sir.
Suddenly the bridge door opened, and in walked the captain's tiger with a tray of tea and cakes.
"Just what we need. It's going to be a long watch."
George the cook sent these up to you, sir. Thought you might be hungry.
"Thank George for me, Tiger."
As the captain took his first bite, he said,
"Very tasty, these cakes, with the added grated chocolate. Make sure everyone gets some."
Just then the telephone rang. Mr. Nav answered it only to be told that there was a ship off the stern and that it was flying some sort of flag the chief officer had never seen before.
Hard to port, Mr. Nav, then hard to starboard.
OK, sir.
Then the captain told Mr. Nav to load the guns. He could see two ships, one on the port side and the other at the stern of Mrs. Orangeleaf.
Do we know who they are, sir?
Said the third mate.
Oh yes, one is Captain Whitebeard, the pirate we are all talking about, and the other is Captain Patch Glasseye. He is a partner of Captain Whitebeard. Let me tell you, in the last 3 months they have attacked many ships and stolen their cargoes.
That ship on the port side is getting closer.
The captain gave the order to the chief officer to put everybody at action stations. A.B. Ali shouted that Captain Whitebeard's ship was closing fast. 300 yards, 250 yards, 100 yards. Captain Patch Glasseye's ship was also coming very near. Mr. Nav shouted over the ship's tannoy system.
OK, lads, get ready for some action.
All this time Mrs. Orangeleaf was doing her best, giving full power and saying to herself,
I will not let my captain, officers and crew get injured.
A few miles away, another one of Mrs. Orangeleaf's cousins was returning from a rescue mission. Cousin Fort George had just returned from taking food, water and helicopters to a place where floods had caused people to lose their homes. He was on his way back with Captain Les. Like Mrs. Orangeleaf, Cousin Fort George was also painted grey and had a number on his side. He too was looked after by a company called the Royal Fleet Auxiliary, who were known to everyone worldwide as the RFA. Captain Les had been listening to the ship's radio and heard Mrs. Orangeleaf's captain warn other ships in the area that Captain Whitebeard was around and other pirate ships were quite close by.
Mr. Barnacle, all the coast northwest. We will go and help the Orangeleaf.
Aye, aye, sir.
Put lookouts on the bridge and around the ship.
When Cousin Fort George heard the news that he was going to help his cousin, Mrs. Orangeleaf, he was so excited. He put all his effort into his speed, even before the captain and his chief engineer said so.
Cousin Fort George is very keen, sir.
Yes, I noticed. Good old George.
Fort George just smiled as the water splashed in his face. He loved it.
I must go fast.
George kept saying to himself.
I must go faster.
Captain Les had informed Captain Stephen that he was on his way. He was pleased to hear that because it was nice to have someone he knew on his side. Meanwhile, down in Mrs. Orangeleaf's engine room, there was a Scouser who was a good laugh and was always well liked by all. He used to love having fun with the lads. He had come back up on deck for some fresh air when he saw one of the crew standing by the ship's railing, looking towards Captain Whitebeard's ship.
Hey, what's going on?
It's that pirate Whitebeard and Captain Patch Glasseye. They are trying to get to this ship, and we are here to try and stop them.
Scouser was known to the lads as the roughy-tufty seaman and a good man to have on your side.
Aye, let me at him. I show him in business.
If you hang around here, Scouser, you'll get your chance.
Meanwhile, a few miles away, Cousin Fort George was making good time. Captain Les was pleased with him, and Cousin Fort George was pleased with himself and proud that he was going to help his cousin, Mrs. Orangeleaf.
Wait until I tell my sister, Fort Victoria. She'll be jealous.
All of a sudden, there was a shout from Mrs. Orangeleaf's bridge that Captain Whitebeard's ship was about 40 feet from her starboard side.
Fire one shot across the bow of his boat.
A few seconds later, there was a loud bang. Everybody looked out to watch the big splash that was caused by the shell hitting the sea. Captain Whitebeard's ship shook.
Let that be a warning.
Captain Whitebeard was so cross that his face was going red with anger.
I'll get that, Captain Stephen. He's made a fool of me once too often.
Captain Whitebeard's pal, Captain Glasseye Patch, was close to Mrs. Orangeleaf when the shot was fired. He too felt his ship move with the shock of the explosion. Captain Glasseye Patch certainly did not want to lose his boat because it was a new one and he hadn't had it long. He turned to one of his crew members on his bridge and said,
Let's get away from this ship. We can attack them again when they're not expecting us, sir.
A cheer went up on Mrs. Orangeleaf from the crew. A message came out from Mrs. Orangeleaf's bridge. It was Captain Stephen.
Gentlemen, my fellow shipmates, that was a taste of things to come. Captain Glasseye Patch may have moved clear of our guns, but Captain Whitebeard is still there, very close to our ship.
Mrs. Orangeleaf looked around her and saw Captain Whitebeard's ship.
We must be all on our guard. He is out there, and he will keep trying. Also Captain Glass Eye Patch may return. I know how they both work. Be ready, lads, and reload the guns.
Soon after, there was a loud bang on deck and a quick flash.
What was that?
It was a rocket fired from Whitebeard's ship.
Tell me what damage we have, Mr. Nav.
The chief officer reported that there was just a dent on the deck of Mrs. Orangeleaf. One of the crew had put the fire hose on the rocket before it had chance to explode.
Well done, that man.
To Mrs. Orangeleaf, it felt like a bruise, a little bit of pain.
It's only minor, so I will carry on.
And she did. Everybody was proud of her. She displayed true courage. Further out to sea, Cousin Fort George was going full speed ahead. He was making his engines work harder than normal. He was showing off a bit. Of course, no one noticed, but Cousin Fort George thought they did. So he carried on. Cousin Fort George was getting all excited because he was nearing the action and felt he could be a hero again, like he had been in the eyes of the public when he went to help the people who had lost their homes in the poor country with the floods.
Alter course, Mr. Barnacle, to 305 degrees west by northwest.
Aye, sir.
Cousin Fort George moved as quickly as he could to the new course. The sea was flat like a mirror. Fort George could see his face in the water. He kept smiling to himself. In the distance, he could see his cousin, Mrs. Orangeleaf.
I would know that sound anywhere. It's Cousin George. Good old George.
Cousin George was half a mile away from Whitebeard's boat when Captain Les told Mr. Barnacle to load and fire the guns. George was young and had never seen action before. He wanted to get closer, but Captain Les stopped to await Captain Stephen's orders. Captain Stephen asked Captain Les to bring Cousin Fort George in closer. George was preparing for action. He was impatient, but he remembered all his training.
I am ready.
With that, George's chief engineer ordered slow speed ahead, and they crawled slowly towards Mrs. Orangeleaf, ready to help at short notice. George was not only feeling proud of himself, he was restless, waiting around for orders. He waited and waited, mumbling to himself, not realising that his chief officer had noticed.
Sir, George is moving around quite a lot. I think he's getting restless.
Hang in there, George. We'll sort Whitebeard out.
With that, there was one almighty bang, and George shuddered.
We've been hit.
Poor Cousin George felt dazed and shocked.
Where did that come from, Mr. Barnacle?
That Whitebeard fired a rocket.
The phone went. It was the chief officer saying that George had sustained minor damage to the centre part of the ship. He had felt some pain, but he knew he had to go on for the sake of Mrs. Orangeleaf. Not only that, his reputation and pride were at stake, so George pushed himself to his limits despite his pain. In the meantime, Captain Whitebeard was cheering because he could see smoke coming from George's side in the centre of the ship. However, the victory would be short-lived because more of Mrs. Orangeleaf's friends were coming to their aid. While all this was going on, the radio operator on Benjamin Illustrious had heard what was going on and decided to turn around and go to help Mrs. Orangeleaf and Cousin George. The man in charge of Benjamin Illustrious was Admiral Michael, one of the most senior men in the Royal Navy and responsible for the safety of all RFA ships. He was very concerned about Mrs. Orangeleaf and Cousin George. On his ship, he carried tornado jets. One was called Norman. He was a fast-moving jet and could fly to areas very quickly should the need arise. He was in his hangar resting. He did not know it, but his services were about to be called on. Admiral Michael decided to send Norman and Norman's pilot, John.
You sent for me, sir?
Yes, I did. I have a job for you and Norman. I want you to take Norman the Tornado and go and fly over Mrs. Orangeleaf and Cousin George. There seems to be a bit of trouble there, and I want to make sure they're safe.
Aye, aye, sir. Norman will be pleased, especially as we have been chosen out of all the jets on board.
John went to Norman's hangar, tapped his nose and said,
Well, Norman, old boy, it looks like you and I are in business again.
Norman loved flying. He loved the feel of the wind whistling around him and how sometimes he would go fast to get out of trouble. As he moved out of his hangar, he could hear the other jets saying,
It's not fair. Lucky Norman gets all the good jobs.
That's not true.
Who was upset by what the other jets were saying about him.
Take no notice, Norman. They're only jealous.
He was given the all clear to take off. As he went past the bridge where Admiral Michael was standing, he made sure he was on his best behaviour. He did the best takeoff he had ever done.
Well done.
Even the Admiral came over John's radio and said,
Nice takeoff and good luck, old chap.
With that, Norman felt a sense of pride. He was so excited that he bounced up and down.
Okay, Norman, let's get back to work.
The wind was in his face. The sky was a clear blue with a few white clouds that looked like balls of cotton wool. As part of a game, Norman would play Count the Clouds. This day, he got up to 10 and was still counting. All of a sudden, through the clouds, he saw the sea that was calm as a mill pond. It looked like diamonds sparkling in the sunlight. John could see 2 grey ships, and he could also see some movement of another ship. Straight away, he knew that was Captain Whitebeard's ship.
Okay, Norman, let's go down and take a closer look and see what we can do.
As Norman made his dive towards the ships, he went.
Yippee! Don't worry, Mrs. Orangeleaf and Cousin George. We are here to help you.
With a roar of his engines, he flew over Captain Whitebeard's ship very low. He was so low that everybody ducked to take cover.
Let that be a lesson to you, Whitebeard. Do not try and pick on our bully friends of Benjamin Illustrious, or any ships that belong to the Queen of the United Kingdom. Ha ha!
By now, Captain Whitebeard was having second thoughts about taking on Mrs. Orangeleaf and Cousin George, because he knew that Benjamin Illustrious would not be far behind, and once he arrived, the pirates would not stand a chance. Captain Patch Glasseye had long gone by now, leaving Captain Whitebeard on his own. He knew this and was calling his fellow pirate horrible names. He was thinking about making a run for it before Benjamin Illustrious arrived, but it was too late. The aircraft carrier was on the horizon. The crews on Mrs. Orangeleaf and Cousin George could see that he was making a run for it and cheered, realising that the victory was theirs.
So you win this time, Captain Stephen, but we'll meet again.
We will see.
Mr. Nav and Mr. Barnacle were told to steer a course south and head for the port of Dubai, so that Mrs. Orangeleaf and Cousin George could have a well-earned rest. The captains of both ships told their crews of their plans, and a cheer went up. They reminded the crews of the hard work and effort that Mrs. Orangeleaf and Cousin George had put in. Mrs. Orangeleaf blushed. Cousin George was singing to himself and, of course, showing off. Chief noticed this but said nothing. After all, it was Cousin George's and Mrs. Orangeleaf's moment of glory.
I wonder what adventures Mrs. Orangeleaf and her friends will go on next. So goodbye for now and see you next time.
Go down, you blood-red roses, go down. My darling boy, come home from sea.